Regarding the general organization of the spinal cord, whenever we look at the cut section of the spinal cord, we all know that we have the ascending tracts that we've already done. And alongside these ascending tracts, we have the descending tracts that we got to study in this particular lecture. So how are they basically organized? We're going to just go through that, and you have to remember the different descending tracts as well. On a broader scale, we divide the descending tracts into the pyramidal tracts, and we name the pyramidal tracts this particular terminology due to the fact that they're basically, we're talking about the corticospinal tracts over here. The basic tracts which are categorized into the pyramidal tracts are the corticospinal tracts. Particularly, we have the lateral corticospinal tract. As you can see over here, it's basically located laterally. Here is the gray butterfly-shaped gray matter, which is present centrally, and we all know that we have the white matter, which is located peripherally. And you have to remember the exact locations for these descending tracts when we look at a cut section of the spinal cord. And then we have the anterior corticospinal tract. So why are they categorized into this particular category, which is known as the pyramidal tracts? Due to the fact that they basically decussate, or they pass on, they cross over into special structures which are basically part of the brainstem known as the pyramids. These special structures or these special projections which you can basically visualize at the posterior end of the medulla oblongata at the pyramids, their decussation takes place, and that is why the name pyramidal tracts is given to the lateral corticospinal tract as well as the anterior corticospinal tract. And then moreover, we have a group of tracts which are basically termed as the extrapyramidal tracts. Namely, when we look, or when we come a bit interior to the lateral corticospinal tract, we have a tract which is known as the rubrospinal tract. Now, these tracts are basically carrying or sending down different messages to different sets of muscles. For instance, when we look at the rubrospinal tract, they are basically facilitating the flexor muscles. And so if any movement that they would be conducting, the facilitation would be carried out through this particular rubrospinal tract that is present anteriorly to the lateral corticospinal tract. Then we have the reticulospinal tract. Again, you would see that it's basically placed quite anteriorly, a bit anteriorly to the rubrospinal tract. And the names are quite hinting. It's going to be quite easy for you when you look at the names of all of these tracts. Although they seem to be quite confusing, but when you look at the names, or when you split the names, they're basically pointing out to the origins as well as to the destinations of these tracts. For instance, if we say the cortico-spinal. So the cortico is basically standing for the cortex, and spinal is basically standing for the destination in the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord. So that is why we name this tract the corticospinal tract. And in the same manner, when we say the rubrospinal tract, it's basically referring to the fact that the origin is in the red nucleus. Rubro is basically standing for the red nucleus, and spinal is again into the cervical and the thoracic segments of the spinal cord. And then we have the reticulospinal tract. So again, it is pointing out towards the fact that the origin basically lies in the reticular formation. And from there on, it basically passes on to the spinal cord. So this is again very easy to name these tracts, and even to recall what we are basically studying and what would be the pathway that they are going to follow from the cortex and or from the subcortical regions towards the spinal cord. If we come a bit more anteriorly, we have this another tract which is known as the olivospinal tract. Either it is present or not, it's quite doubtful, but it is basically going to encompass or help in the voluntary actions of some of the set of muscles. And then we have the vestibulospinal tract. It's again placed a bit anteriorly, and it's much closer to the anterior median fissure. When we look at the structure of the spinal cord, we know that this is the anterior median fissure, and then we have this posterior median fissure, which is lying. So all of these tracts, the olivospinal and the vestibulospinal, they are basically in close relation to the anterior median fissure. And all of these tracts are again basically bringing back the information from the higher centers of the brain. So they're not carrying the information, they are bringing back the information from the higher centers of the brain towards the spinal cord. And from there on, there is either a second order neuron, or sometimes they literally supply or inhibit the action potential towards the third order neuron, and the messages are passed on from there on. So this basically depends upon the different tracts, and how we're going to discuss all of these tracts in detail individually as well. This is the lateral corticospinal tract and how it descends down. This is the rubrospinal tract over here. And then we have the vestibulospinal tract. This is basically the how the tracts are basically descending down, and they are entering the gray column over here. Then we have the reticulospinal tract, which is present more anteriorly and more close to the anterior median fissure. Now, how are you going to remember this? There is a very interesting mnemonic that is going to help you out. It's basically, he drove a Honda CR-V to Disneyland. So basically over here, you can remember that we have the corticospinal tracts, and you have to remember at the same time that the corticospinal tracts are basically two tracts. We have an anterior corticospinal tract, and at the same time, we have a lateral corticospinal tract. Then we have the rubrospinal tracts, we have the vestibulospinal tracts, and then we have the corticospinal tracts that are anterior and lateral, the rubrospinal, the vestibulospinal, the tectospinal tracts that are lying over here. And finally, we have the olivospinal tract. So this mnemonic is basically going to help you out. Remember, just when you are to name the descending tracts, you can easily remember and name the descending tracts in this particular way.